Hi, and welcome to the Brookdale Visiting Writer Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker. I'm part of the English faculty here at Brookdale, as well as directing the creative writing program. Today on our show, we have an absolutely wonderful award-winning poet, Patrick Phillips, who has two books. The first is called Chattahoochee, and his more recent book, with a cover I just love, is called Boy. And so, very excited to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Great cover.
Thank you.
I always like a good cover. I'm that person who buys the bottle of wine for the label. It's like, oh, that's nice.
Understood. I'm happy with it too.
Yeah. This isn't actually one of your sons, is it?
No, but actually, if I could show you a picture, he looks remarkably like that. And the people who designed the book had never met me or my son, so coincidence.
Well, I'd like to start off just asking you, how did you come to poetry? How did you come to writing poetry?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I always think of a couple of sources. One is a teacher, of course. I think of Mr. Barbary, my 8th grade English teacher. But the other way is I grew up in a house where language and the sort of music of language and the sound of it and the power of it was vivid for me. My father's a minister, so I grew up when I was very young going to hear my father preach sermons in a Methodist church on Sundays. So it was a very dramatic thing when you're a little kid and your dad stands up in a robe with the whole thing and is preaching the sermon. So I got kind of mesmerized by the sound of words and language and the power of it from that. And then, grew up in a house full of books and some wonderful teachers along the way.
Do you see poetry as a kind of preaching in a way? Are they, kissing cousins?
I think of it, I think I'm not a fan of preachy poems, and I'm not a fan of lectures, or I'm not even a fan of didactic poems. But I also tend towards song and the lyric and the sound of it. But I do think I love the part of poetry that is public and that seems to be sort of speaking to people. I guess the part of it that's specialized language. That's what I remember is realizing when my dad stood up and was preaching a sermon, or when people were saying something and the whole congregation, chimes in. I remember thinking, this is the same language that we use all the time, but there's something special about this. This is unique, and this is full of mojo and power and so that I think that's related to a good sermon or a good preaching, but also song and that sense of the communal.
Yeah, and the emotional investment in what's being said.
Yeah, I mean, my love of poetry developed almost entirely from sound, just the sound. My first favorite poet was Gerard Manley Hopkins, and the sounds of the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It gathers to a greatness like shining from shook foil. So for me, it had nothing to do with what I thought about poetry and everything to do with how I like the sound of it.
How you like the sound?
Yeah.
Well, part of the reason I asked that question about how you came to poetry is between your two books, Chattahoochee and Boy, both have a speaker we kind of stay with throughout the collections. There's, there's kind of a cast of characters.
Yeah, I think so.
There's, a brother and a son and father. And then in Boy, there's the son has become the father, and there are sons and more fathers still around in a way. There is sort of this peek into a family in a way. Yeah. And I wondered what role or where your poems were coming from. I hate to ask if they're autobiographical, because of course they're not. They're created objects.
Yeah, but I understand the question in that I think they aren't autobiographical in a strict sense, and that the books are not, I don't advertise to anyone that this is a memoir. But on the other hand, I think, it's kind of undeniably about a family and some relationships. So I'm really interested in family. I think that I came from a family. My brother is 6 years older than me, and the first book is largely, Chattahoochee is set in the place where I grew up in North Georgia, and is largely about my brother and my father having this kind of war in the way that can happen. My teenage brother and my very strong-willed kind of bull of a father clashing. And as when you're 6 years younger, that means I was 12 when he was 18, I was 10 when he was 16, and it puts you in the position of being the watcher, and I think I sometimes think another thing that made me want to write and that made me at least have the point of view of a writer is just, I was always the boy on the step, when things were going down, when the clash of the titans between my father and my brother was going on. And that means that at that age, you don't necessarily understand what it all means. So you can observe but not necessarily piece it all together. And for me anyway, that left a lot of work to be done in adulthood. That left a lot of memories of things that happened, and not just clashes, good and bad, but complex. I think it made me aware of the complexities of people and the complexities of fathers and mothers and brothers and being related to people. You know, there's a surface way in which family is always in the popular culture inflected with sweetness and light, and that was my experience, you know. And not that there wasn't sweetness either, but it was also a battlefield sometimes. So, you know, I think, and then I've been writing, that got me interested in family, and then there's the kind of mind-blowing experience of the whole drama is recast when you become a parent, but you change roles, you know. So that also left a lot to think about and work through.
I wonder what role writing a poem has for you then. Is it a working through?
You know, I cringe at that just because, you know, I guess I cringe at that because I never want to think of poems as therapeutic. You know, if writing a poem helps somebody, that's great, but that's not the road in my mind to writing the kinds of poems. You know, I'm like Keats. I want to be among the English poets. You know, the aspirations are to write something worthy, and I've never found the thing that necessarily benefits me personally. There's no direct correlation that automatically yields the best poem. So I'm kind of ruthless. I'll do anything for the poem. You know, I'll do anything for the poem. Meaning I don't need to portray myself as the hero. I don't need to portray other people. I mean, I've written poems that I was pretty sure were probably gonna wound people somewhat. You know, and not on purpose, but just because that's trying to say something true and try to say something, you know, worth saying.
Gotcha. I think in your work as well too, memory and kind of its shifting quality in a way, and the way that people who fill the memories change as well. I know that in, I think it's Chattahoochee, there's a poem called Baptism, and at the end of the father sort of baptizing the son, he says the word ghost. He hears the word ghosts. And I'm just kind of wondering, there's a poem as well in Boy, and I was wondering, I've marked it, called Living. If you would read it. And
sure.
I'd love afterwards to talk about sort of the relationship your work has with memory and ghosts.
Okay, sure. And yeah. Okay, so this poem's called Living. It's short, it's very brief. I am living in the past, but it is not my own. The future came to pass, this future where we're grown. And yet my children only half believe the youngest son in the ancient photographs is a boy I lived in once. I laugh my father's laugh. It has no other home. The future is a myth, and then it is a stone. I'm almost certain I have very rarely read that poem, so.
It's a wonderful poem. Well, you should read it tonight. Too. Then you can read it twice.
Well,
why don't you read that poem?
Oh, I don't know. It's a good question. You know, one develops with the greatest hits. You know, you want to do Freebird every time. So.
I'm surprised that's not on the greatest hits list.
Maybe it will be now.
Can you talk about, though, because that seems very much about memory and shifting. And a lot of your work does. And I'm wondering kind of what your relationship is to that as a writer.
You know, I think my relationship to memory is I feel more baffled and bewildered by memory and by life in general than at least than some people seem to be. So, you know, I think I write less out of things that I understand about my own memories and about my past than about things that I don't quite know what they mean. So, you know, in that poem, I'm trying at least to talk about, you know, the lightning fast way that one goes from being the boy to, you know, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old son now. And so a lot of that book is just kind of astonishment at that idea. And I think there's a weird way in which I wasn't prepared for the simultaneity of being still my parents' son and my son's father. You know, it puts you in this middle place. You know, the great image of this is Aeneas, you know, going out of the ruins of Troy, and he has his father on his shoulders and his son at his hand, and that's middle age for me right now. That's, you know, is the strange thing of being an adult child of your aging parents and the parent of another child. So it's trying to figure that out, or not even really resolve it, but just I guess give voice to the dizzying simultaneity of that. And I think you know that's always on my mind when I'm writing about memory. Is none of it feels. It's Faulkner's quote where he says, you know, the past isn't even over. It isn't even past. Isn't over. It isn't even past. And that's my experience often of memory, is feeling it kind of very present. Maybe it's being from the South, I don't know.
What do you mean from the South?
Well, the South is a kind of haunted place. Yeah. And you know, my grandparents and the people I grew up around they had incredibly long memories. And, you know, my mom still, you know, when she comes north, I've realized there's a chip on her shoulder, you know, coming from Georgia and coming to the city, and I'm like, where is that coming from? But strangely enough, you got to, you know, it's a historic chip. It's not just a personal or a familial one. Yeah. It's a cultural thing. Yeah.
Well, having that cultural memory though, and coming from a people who have that long memories, it can't be a bad thing for a writer in a way.
I guess not. You know, I don't know. I mean, I guess everybody works with what they've got to work with. I mean, another example of that sense of hauntedness is, you know, the book is called Chattahoochee, and I grew up on a lake north of Atlanta called Lake Lanier, and my parents built a lovely house right on the shores of Lake Lanier on the banks. And you know, it was only after living there for a while that I learned the story, which is that the lake was dammed. The lake was built in 1955 when they dammed the Chattahoochee River, and to provide power for Atlanta. And when they dammed the river, it flooded a very large area, including lots of inhabited places. Yeah. So, you know, I've now researched it more, but that feeling of I was on this lake and under the water.
There are homes.
There were I mean, that there was a world down there. There's a kind of Atlantis under the river, and that, you know, to whatever degree that's factually true, and it is true. I've researched it now. It is true to some extent, but in my imagination, it became, you know, elaborately true.
Well, that's probably we have to take a break, but that's probably a great metaphor going out on the idea that, you know, you're on this lake, but underneath it there are
under the surface of things
submerged homes. Well, we have to take a break, but we will be right back, and we are talking with Patrick Phillips. Please join us after the break.
Here are the low monthly payments and interest rate as we promised. Here's where they triple. The rest of this is really just here so that we get your house when you can't pay us back.
Predatory lenders are never this easy to spot. Call us and protect yourself with the facts.
Family and friends can provide the support you need to reduce your risk of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. Eat right and get active.
Hi, and welcome back to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series show. My name's Suzanne Parker. I'm the director of the creative writing program here, and I'm talking with Patrick Phillips, the author of 2 collections of poetry, most recently the collection called Boy. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the show.
Thanks very much.
Before the break, we were talking sort of about memory and the role it plays in your work. One of the other elements across both of your books that I see quite a bit of play with is formal elements in your poems, you know, sonnets and Chattahoochee and ghazals, and I wonder what attracts you to form. You don't see a lot of writers working in form now.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I have a kind of, my development in that has been almost the exact reverse of my heroes, which is, you know, one of the first poets I really loved was James Wright, who he's a high formalist, you know, wins the Yale Younger Poets Award and is celebrated for his first 2 books in form. And, you know, after his second book came out, he sort of wrote to his publishers at Wesleyan and said, whatever I was doing in that book, I'm through with. I'm not doing it anymore. And, you know, the next book, The Branch Will Not Break, is this groundbreaking free verse kind of surreal book, and I loved all of that stuff. I absolutely adored Wright's poems, and when I read him, I mostly was interested in the free verse poems, and that's the way I wrote. And the longer I've gone, the more I've gone back to, I've gotten very interested in meter and form and any kind of repetition and refrain. And, you know, again, it comes back to what I said at the beginning. My initial love of poem is the sound of it, and highly charged language, and language that seems to do something other than the everyday, you know. And so, to me, form and repetition does that like nothing else, and forms that are things that are elements of form that are taken from song, and, you know, especially that sense in which it's often repetition, variation, and then a return. And I'm really addicted to that feeling of returning to the familiar, but changed, that can happen with the resolution of a form.
Do you find that the dictates of whatever form you're using are in some way liberating to you, or
absolutely
in your process?
This sounds like you're giving my class on this. I talk about this in a class all the time. Yeah, absolutely. I teach, and when I'm teaching students who are resistant to form, I often say, you know, you're not going to believe this, but, you know, putting the handcuffs on can actually get you out of your own way. You know, it can free you up. And yeah, if I'm working to figure out, okay, I need one more beat to make the foot, one more foot to make the line, 13 more lines to make the sonnet, then a couple of things have happened. One, I've cut the problem down to size.
Yeah, there seems to be I'm not going to write a poem, I'm just going to write a beat. That's all I do.
And I'm like, okay, I can finish. I'm going to get the 5th beat of this line, and I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. I mean, some of this stems from
the reward system could be so much greater.
And I think it stems from the fact that I find writing difficult. I heard people talk about it in ways that are different from that, as if it comes easy, or as if it is a pure pleasure. But I don't experience it that way. I find it difficult. It's a pleasure when they work out. You know, it's a lot of difficult sort of slogging along, and I'm very easily bored. I think a sort of mild ADD is probably one of my other part of the skill set as a poet, is I can't hang in there unless I feel stimulated by by the poem. So I find form has that effect of keeping me interested as a writer. Is this
sort of the puzzle aspect, the challenge of the next move?
Absolutely, yeah, really obsessive, but it lets you disappear into the obsession, and good things, for me anyway, good things and interesting things are more likely to happen when I'm actually, it's like, my wife does Sudoku, and I watch her.
I was going to say, do you like,
I hate
are you
Sudoku.
a puzzle person?
I despise Sudoku. I think because I spend all day doing a Sudoku-like formal work. So she does those, and I feel that if I can disappear into that kind of an obsession, it's not just that I don't want a blue ribbon for finishing my sonnet, but I find that more interesting things happen when my conscious mind can be occupied in that way, and some unconscious associations or some kind of imaginative leaps can happen because I've stopped, trying to steer the thing. And I find it. I mean, there are all kinds of poets. For me, the formal assignment is one of the best ways I know for me to loosen my grip on the poem, which is paradoxical, but it's the way it works.
Are you able to convince your students of that?
Yeah. A lot. And amazingly, it takes two things. One is to tell them, just play around. This is just an exercise. You're not writing a poem. It doesn't matter if it comes out. See if you can write a villanelle. See if you can write a hazel. And it also, I use the hazel a lot because, given that it comes to us, via Persian, forms, it's not like trying to compete with Shakespeare. Every time you write a sonnet, you have to compete with Wyatt and Surrey and Shakespeare. If you write a villanelle, you have to compete with Elizabeth Bishop. If they write a hazel, they don't know about Fez Ahmed Fez, and they don't feel the anxiety of that. So I start with forms that are unfamiliar to them, and really focus on the notion of just repetition. That you know, and the other pitch I make is that the beauty of the form, say you're writing a villanelle, is if you get a couple of really good lines, you get to spend them over and over again. You get to maximize the payoff of your two great lines. You know. So.
Well, I'm wondering, would you share a poem that's in form?
Sure. Yeah. This is also a poem I have not frequently read, so this is a good occasion. Yeah, this is called Sons and Brothers, and you'll hear. I mean, it's just in quatrains, and it has an A-B rhyme scheme for the quatrains, and and the other thing about me as a formalist is I'm almost always fudging things. Sons and brothers. When I see them on the playground clawing to get or keep some treasure or another, bickering and bawling all that's fair and unfair to their mother, I can't help marveling that we were like them once, each brother a star locked inescapably within the orbit of the other. And though I want to still believe that their embrace in war and peace will go on that way forever, these days when arm in arm we drink at someone's wedding or another, the past is what we scratch and claw and cannot keep, though I was once your brother.
That's another lovely one. You should read it more often.
I will now. I will.
What about, interesting, you talk about breaking the form too. How does that feel when, you have these set of expectations, and then there's that kind of explosive moment where you sort of break out of the box?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a continuum to me between breaking and also fudging and blurring, and I love the near rhyme, the almost rhyme, and the formal arrival that kind of, it's like the no-look pass in basketball, you know. I like the formal arrival that doesn't draw a lot of attention to itself, so that you kind of feel it without too much flash. So that's, there's kind of blurring, but then, I think, breaking forms is also productive. I have written a lot of poems that started out in a form and then I threw it away.
Well, I was going to ask, what is the process? So do you sit down and say, I will now write a sonnet?
No. I don't. Like I said, I find writing hard. So usually for me, the process is that I'm struggling and I'm really frustrated with a poem and I can't get it to work. But my process is play. I play kind of as much as I can. So I work on a lot of poems at one time. I'm sort of inching them all forward. I'm abandoning ones. I'm rummaging through my hard drive from 3 years ago to see if something that I abandoned turns out to have more going on than I thought. So I just play, and I think that I am now, if there's the only thing that gets easier, then it doesn't get any easier, but the one thing that gets a little bit more helpful is the more I've read and the more I've become aware and admired the poems of others working in some kind of structure or form, I'm more aware of the options. So,
who do you read? Who has helped you?
Well, my favorite poet on this subject is Donald Justice. I love Justice, and he's both a crazy man in some of the poems, and also the just exquisite instrumentalist. The guy who can really play all 88 keys, and there's a kind of crystalline precision when he's writing in forms, the Italian word is the sprezzatura, right? Doing the very difficult thing, but not seeming to break a sweat. And I love Justice for all of that. So I think reading people, finding heroes who have exploited those things, it simply makes me more aware of the possibilities. But I actually I make my students sit down and write a villanelle or a sonnet. I myself often, in just kind of working over material that I like, but I can't seem to get anything out of it, I'll have it try on a lot of different hats and see if one of them seems to fit. Or just if good new work. I find forms generative, so I'm really interested. If I decide, okay, I'm going to see if I can make this into a sonnet. If it was a 12-line poem, suddenly I got to say 2 more lines worth of stuff, and sometimes that and it may not be at the end. It may be I do it somewhere else, but that push to more fully elaborate, suddenly you go, this is now working. But it was the formal push that made it go. Well,
I know there are some poets, Carol Frost, for example, we had on the show a while ago, whose work I love, who made up her own form.
I do.
Have you done that?
Too.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, nonce forms. I've done that probably more than I've written in received forms. Yeah, and that again comes from being originally, very intimidated by form, not having a good ear for scansion in the beginning, not always understanding what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so once you start to get a hankering for repetition, in a way, nonce forms are the way in, because you start to realize that you can create a certain effect, and you can create this energy with the return and the suspense that comes with, as the reader's waiting for that return.
Sure. Well, they're both absolutely wonderful books, and
Thank you.
and I would recommend anybody read them, and you should read those other poems more often.
All right, I will. I will indeed.
It's been a pleasure talking with you on this show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Suzanne.
And
my
thank
pleasure.
you, folks, for watching. This is Suzanne Parker, and if you'd like to know more about the Creative Writing Program or its events at Brookdale, please check us out online at www.brookdalecc.edu, and please watch us again.